Hi there. My name's Lacey McCormick. I'm with the National Wildlife Federation, and I want to talk to you today about the May 2023 Sackett Supreme Court decision that greatly narrowed the scope of the Clean Water Act. This video is part of our initiative to help local groups explain the impact of this decision to people in their area as well as to news media in their area. And the reason we want to do this is because we know that local news is, in this polarized time, the most trusted source of information about the environment. And so it makes sense to take this issue to local news. And also we know that the solutions, at this time, the solutions to this problem are at the state and local level. So local news will be the most impactful in making those happen. And I kind of want to start out by giving you some encouragement to talk about this issue. People have long ranked clean water and clean drinking water as the most important environmental issue. Every April, Gallup polling does the environment poll, and every year, clean drinking water and clean, rivers, lakes, and streams are the top issues. This year, I thought the results were very interesting. Clean drinking water was actually more important than inflation. People value this incredibly highly. This is sort of like motherhood and apple pie level stuff. It is not controversial at all. And the other thing that I kind of wanted to share from you about this poll is that 50% of Americans believe that the federal government is doing too little to protect the environment. And only 19% believe that it's doing too much. So you might have thoughts about this as being sort of like, oh, I don't really want to get into that. That's, a tough issue. The public knows very little about the details of all of this, but they are very, very supportive of this as a general issue. And I think that they would like to hear about this decision and what it might mean for people, for their drinking water supplies or for, wetlands in their area. They just don't know very much about it at all. Most people don't know much about the Clean Water Act, and they haven't heard about Sackett at all. Very few people have heard about Sackett or know what that's about, which is kind of, I think, interesting information. If you are some sort of conservation advocate and environmental advocate, you probably have heard of this issue, but the public really just, has not. It came out roughly around the same time as the Dobbs decision, which most people are aware of, but this one has really not, made any kind of the same level of public impact. That said, when you explain it to them, they're very, very supportive. 75% of adults are supportive of an expansive definition of the waters protected by the Clean Water Act. And nearly everyone, 88% of adults, when you explain to them how the Clean Water Act works, they would be concerned to learn that the permit requirement to make a permanent physical change to a water body was being removed for some waters. No one really likes it when they hear about it. They just haven't heard anything about it really at all. But when they do, they don't like it. So kind of just want to say, this is safe territory to talk about. That said, if you are a conservationist, a conservation advocate, you've probably heard, some rumblings of this issue for quite some time. And as you start messaging about this issue, I would just encourage you to start with where the American public is at, blank slate. They have not heard about it. They didn't hear anything about the stuff that's been talked about with this issue for the past 20 years. So they haven't heard of Sackett. They don't know what it is. And I would actually encourage you not to use the name Sackett versus EPA. Most people know there's some kind of Supreme Court decision about, restricting abortion rights, but they don't know anything. They don't know the name Dobbs. And I don't think we'll ever really successfully brand Sackett as something that people have heard of. But we do want to talk about loss of protections for our waters. So if you know any of the terminology on this slide, what I would recommend is that if you are talking to the public in your area, or if you're trying to talk to, local news in your area, to just sort of leave all that behind. The public doesn't know what you're talking about, and they won't find it very interesting. Honestly, it's just a lot of policy, and people care very much about, clean water, et cetera. They care very little about environmental policy. It's hard for us to hear. So there is this very interesting document, the Language of Conservation Memo. They update it every 4 or 5 years, and it also encapsulates decades of polling. And so I just kind of want to summarize. All the links, by the way, that you can see in this presentation are live if you click on the slideshow. People care very much about drinking water, and they care a lot about local water bodies in their area. And you can probably immediately think of the water bodies that people really care about. They care about public health, and they care about people's physical health, but they also care about mental health. And people have really started to get this idea that access to nature is really important for mental health. So, and that these water bodies are sort of important for just sort of your overall well-being, as well as your physical health. People really care about wildlife. They do want to hear about how this decision will affect wildlife in their area. And they also want to hear about, how loss of these protections could affect future generations, their children and grandchildren. But a couple of notes is that we don't want to lean into gloom and doom. It's not solvable. Congress is never going to do anything. There's nothing that can be done. It's all bad. Another thing, that when you're talking about SACIT and you're trying to kind of generate support for doing something about SACIT, you don't want to lean too heavily into how polluted or damaged these waters might already be. Unless people in your area already perceive that their waters are polluted or damaged, then I wouldn't make that, the top line of what I'm talking about. And the other thing is that if you're a conservation advocate, you and your immediate followers are probably extremely concerned about, alarmed, I would say, about climate change. And the general public now, more than half, roughly 60% of Americans do believe that climate change is real and that it's happening, but they are not as alarmed about it as conservationists and people that, pay attention to what conservationists say are. I read that 55% of Americans don't believe it will be a serious threat in their lifetimes. So you can make it about climate change. Of course, you're going to want to mention climate change, but I wouldn't lean into, we need to do this because of climate change. I would lean into more, we need to do this for future generations. We need to do this, to protect our quality of life. We need to do this to protect our drinking water. Climate change is, of course, an argument, but the public does not perceive it to be the threat that many people watching this video do. Finally, again, so all of these headlines, you can click on them if you look at the slideshow. I told you that most Americans don't know about this issue. It did get fairly robust national media coverage when it happened in May of 2023. And again, I think in August of 2023 or later in 2023, when the EPA issued its rule implementing the decision, there was, national public radio covered it. The New York Times has covered it. CNN and Fox covered it. The Wall Street Journal covered it. Washington Post, AP, etc. So that said, we know that most Americans have still not heard of it. And I wanted to this video has just been intended to be like a brief summary and a brief bit of encouragement for you guys to weigh in. And I think furthering that point is the fact that the Fox News story does not in any way mention what it's actually about, because it's just not popular. It's not popular. Protecting our drinking water is popular on both sides of the aisle. It's a completely nonpartisan, just common sense issue. So it's not a right or left issue. It's not perceived by the public to be a right or left issue. So they would like to hear about this from you. You might notice that I don't include any local media headlines, and that is because There really wasn't much local coverage of this issue, barely, hardly any at all. And that is because I think it's a complicated issue and people don't know how to weigh in. People don't know how to talk about it. Local advocates heard about it, but they didn't really know what it would mean or how to talk about it. So that is kind of the purpose of all of these videos and this toolkit, to help you to weigh in, help you to describe to people what it's going to mean for folks in your area. Thank you very much.